I guess they can always ask you. Good evening. Tonight is Monday, September 30th, and it's 5:30 PM. And tonight is a full work session night. So we're going to get busy tonight. With forward to looking forward to your update, Mr. McCain.
Thank you, ma'am. First off, I want to say the Pueblo Police Department will be holding Northside Community Meeting this Wednesday from 6 to 7:30 PM at the Park Hill Baptist Church located at 4235 Park Hill Place. If you have any questions, call 719-553-2517. This Saturday, October 5th, will be Pueblo Parks and Rec's last movie in the park for the season. Join us at the City Park Pool Parking Lot, drive-in style, for a free movie showing of Haunted Mansion. The movie will begin around dusk. Gates open at 5. Our concession stand will be open until 9:30 to purchase items. And big thank you to Print Pros for sponsoring the Haunted Mansion movie. Team Up to Clean Up. The City of Pueblo will host its second free dump day of the year, Saturday, October 26th. More information with location details, time will be coming. For now, just mark your calendars for October 26th. And that concludes my update.
Great, thank you. Anything from council?
Mr. McCain, is for the Team Up to Cleanup, you said October 26th. Is that going to be at the State Fairgrounds and CSUP or just the fairgrounds?
I'm not sure yet, but it's probably going to be the same as last time. We're just working through the details right now, but I'll have more information by next Monday.
Okay. And last time it started at 8.
Still haven't decided on that.
Okay,
yet, but
TBD.
yeah,
October
TBD.
26th though.
Part of it was our, one of the people coordinating it was out of town for the past few weeks on vacation.
Well, I think it's great that we're having it. I can't believe it's already time to have our second one of the year. So
And hopefully the weather won't be snowing or storming.
lest we
It'll be
forget.
nice. So
Thanks.
Okay, anyone else? All righty, great, thank you. So we'll get started with our first guest tonight, and that is Sharon Campbell. Is she with the ADA Advisory Committee to give us an annual report? Good evening, Sharon.
My PowerPoint up. I'd like to introduce Don Brusco, who has one of the few people that's been on the committee almost as long as I have.
Be sure and turn your mic on.
That one. All right, thank you. The ADA Advisory Committee is, oh, is this my remote? No. The ADA Advisory Committee is one of the few in the city which actually was part of a settlement agreement by the Department of Justice. I don't think any of you have been on council long enough to remember that, but it was 1992. Oh, you have, Dennis? All right. So we monitor the city's compliance with the ADA, which, as you know, has evolved over the years. So we have to keep updating. Our requirements for the committee are that 51% of the committee members have to be people with disabilities or have access to a network of people with disabilities. So we do have like parents with children with disabilities who have been on our committee. Most of us have invisible disabilities, but we do have a number of people who use wheelchairs and walkers and canes and have artificial knees and wear hearing aids. So we represent a wide spectrum of people in the city. We have done 13 walk roll audits. What are those? we get invited to or invite ourselves to a place where the ability of people to go from point A to point B can be impacted negatively. You probably have noticed we have 1 or 2 broken sidewalks in town. But CDOT messed up a very important intersection, and our walk roll audit was we were able to go through and say, hey, you need to change this, you need to change that. Because merely meeting the compliance requirements does not necessarily make something really accessible. So we have done those and expect to do considerably fewer in 2024. We monitor access to city, county, and state facilities and services. Not every facility necessarily has to be physically accessible. The services can be made accessible by other ways. The county courthouse and state fairgrounds, we have done a little bit of work with, but where they're not technically mandated by the settlement agreement, we figure they're in town. So Puebloans should be able to access them. We are experts in what people, particularly with mobility impairments, need. And we want to advise on projects before you build them. It'll save a whole bunch of money having to do some expensive retrofits, as CDOT discovered. We have had a lot of successes. The department heads have been reporting to us regularly. Buildings have been renovated. We've been able to see plans. We've been able to give our input, and changes have been made before any concrete was poured. And we are really, really impressed with the staff that you have here. They are awesome. They squeeze the best they can out of every nickel and dime in their budget, and they all deserve a raise. We help with the city county library renovations. The libraries work closely with us, and we have a very, very accessible library, accessible to people with sensory disabilities as well as mobility impairments. The Complete Streets Initiative is something we have 2 members representing disability access issues. Are you one of them? No, okay. But they work hard to help Pueblo be a place of smooth travels from one place to another. The Pueblo Bowls management came to us when they were working on their arena. And after some interesting events, they now have a lift for people who use wheelchairs that actually works, despite China's best efforts to really delay it getting here. And then it got here and it didn't quite work. So then they had to get that fixed. But Pueblo Bowls Arena is now accessible. And we did have the new regional building chief come and talk to us. And we want to deepen our interactions with Mark Guerrero. We provided some input on the Dutch Clark Stadium parking lot, but we weren't able to do as much as we wanted to do. We did a walk roll audit, Sangre de Cristo Art Center facility, and they have continued to work with us to make their facility as accessible as possible. There are always issues with transit. Somebody wants something, somebody has a problem. But when those issues arise, the transit and paratransit people bring it to the committee and we discuss it. And if there's a way to make something, a barrier, go away, we can do that. There are things that cannot be done. And if they cannot be done, then the heads of the departments can say, look, it can't be done. Cannot widen the ramp to get a wheelchair into a bus beyond a certain level because it's a standard product that the manufacturers cannot make easily adjustable. We have had some challenges. District 60 has been extremely unresponsive. We have called them, we have talked to them. We had a meeting with one of the school board members. And it's like, yes, honey, go away now. So we do intend to pursue that to make sure that the District 60 solves some of its problems. The State Fair has been even worse than District 60, believe it or not. The State Fair is admittedly a state project, but it's here in Pueblo. We have offered our assistance for years and been completely ignored. The biggest problem in the city that's left over in the settlement agreement is sidewalks. And clearly there probably isn't enough money in the entire state budget to fix all of Pueblo's sidewalks. But the city employees do an awesome job of chipping away at what's left. If somebody has a problem, they use a wheelchair, they use a walker, and they want to get from A to B, and there's this curb blocking them. If they let the city know, that is promptly fixed. Well, as promptly can be given the constraints of the system. And then after that, they work with places that are used most and places that need curb cuts so people can get to the buses, and work their way down the priority list and have just been incredible. Our county resident used to not be there very much, but he's starting to come. This county is not part of the settlement agreement, but they have facilities located here in Pueblo, and they have figured out that we can save them some money if they talk to us before they break ground. The Disability Access Customer Service Office in the county courthouse has been wonderful. And the county definitely deserves a lot of kudos for doing that. We've been trying to do outreach to the business community. I don't know how to pronounce that last name. Concilia Enterprise owns a lot of buildings, and they renovated the large home on Ormond in Colorado, which is an incredibly beautiful place, but clearly was not designed with wheelchair accessibility when the architects worked on it first. So we tried to tell them, we'd like to do an audit for you. We're not telling you to put in elevators in the building. We just want, if you're going to use it for an event center, for people to be able to get in the doors and have a bathroom they can use. And they're really not interested in hearing from us, but we will persist. Committee provided Chamber of Commerce feedback on the Chili and Frijole Festival. And it was much more accessible this year than it was 2 years ago. We want to connect with the local Builders Association on visitability. And I will have Dawn explain what visitability is.
Visitability in a residential property is when there's at least one entrance into the building that is 36 inches wide. The threshold is flat and presents no obstacle to a wheelchair entering it. The entrance is at grade, and on that same floor, there is a restroom with a 36-inch doorway. Now, this is not meeting ADA total standards. What it is, it just allows a person in a wheelchair to enter a dwelling and to exit the dwelling. For example, if you have person that uses a wheelchair, if we want to invite over for dinner, they can get into your home, they can use your restroom, and they can leave. That's what visitability is.
Visitability contributes to a sense of community, so it's obviously important. And at some point in the future, we may ask the city council to consider putting visitability standards into the regional building code. Our big challenges, state fair leadership. CDOT, we actually made some progress on, went to a meeting there and made a connection with one of the people in the top levels of their organization. And I kept mentioning the Purcell and Highway 50 intersection, which they messed up royally. And everybody, when I would mention it, would kind of cringe. So I think that they have gotten the message. We get reports on emergency preparedness, and we participate in the emergency drills. Tura Cowan, who uses a motorized wheelchair, has gone out to the airport, and so has Laura. And those two have gone out and participated, and we're hoping to get more participation of people with actual disabilities instead of temporarily able-bodied people pretending to have disabilities. Once upon a time, the Red Cross came to one of our meetings. We want to pursue that some more. We need to find ways to be more active in the statewide access and functional needs program, which helps both emergency providers and people with disabilities prepare for severe disasters. Fortunately, we don't have hurricanes here, but there are a lot of people in a world of hurt because what do you do if you have a motorized chair? Where do you go if it's flooding? So those plans have to be made. We're promoting awareness of the ADA, and we just talk to people. And there's been a lot of progress in fraudulent service animals in stores. A lot of places now have signs up saying, no, you can't bring your pet. And we had to start using Zoom a couple of years ago. And I have to admit to some personal resistance. I don't like Zoom. I like in-person meetings, but they've been very effective, and we would like to see more city involvement. And we were delighted that captioning was at the mayor's State of the City presentation the year before last. I don't know if it was there this year. Did you have a State of the City? Oh, okay. Well, you need to make sure that people know the captioning is there, because I know for a fact there were more than 2 of us who could have used it. I have a question for you. We have been a very effective committee. Why are we the only committee that doesn't have a city employee helping us with minutes? Minutes are very challenging. Some of us don't hear too well. We had a blind member who was trying to take minutes working from recordings, and we had to learn to introduce ourselves, say, this is Sharon speaking, so that she could follow along. We have a lady who really doesn't have much in the line of hands, and a gentleman who has no hands. So we really need the help from the city. We work hard for you. We're not paid for you. It doesn't seem like a lot to ask. Are there any questions?
Any questions from council? Councilor Gomez.
In reference to the openings that you're talking about, hallway openings, door openings,
Mhm.
32 inches, correct? A 2x4 is, I believe, 96 inches, correct? For construction, 2x4s, right?
There's some
So is
captioning
that
here.
the 36 inches that you're talking about? What's the width of the wheelchair? What's the width of the wheelchair?
The wheelchair is about 32 inches.
32 inches. So you have 2 inches on each side, I guess, for clearance.
Mhm.
Okay, so you're looking to go to 36 inches, and I'm just thinking about cost wise. If I have, say in my home, I have 32-inch entry doors, okay, and my restaurant has 36 inches. So if we look at we take a look at a door opening, the cost of the door goes up if you go to 36 inches. Of course, you know that. But I'm just wondering, what's the balance between what it costs to have a bigger opening that uses less material than the 32-inch, as opposed to having a door that you put in the same framing? But it kind of, does it throw off the 2x4? If you're doing 2x4s by 8 foot, 96 inches, has anybody figured that out? What is the cost savings or cost loss in reference to utilizing different sizes for each door opening or each hallway opening? Do we know that?
No, that hasn't been determined. Because it varies on the type of dwelling, and so it'd be difficult for us to try to put a price range on that.
And
Yeah,
we're planning on visitability being planned into the home at the design stage. So we're not expecting anybody, except those who absolutely have to retrofit their home. But right now, there are very few homes in Pueblo that are wheelchair accessible.
See, I have my little apartment next to my restaurant, so I had to have a 36-inch door, and it was metal. And the cost differential between 32 inches and 36 is quite a bit, believe it or not. But mine had to be metal and all this other stuff. So I'm not trying to be a pain in the neck. I'm just trying to say, I'm trying to figure out what's the cost difference. And then you talk about District 60 not being cooperative. You
We're-
talked about.
We're suggesting at new construction, not as a retrofit.
Okay,
Only new construction.
okay, so, and you talked about State Fair uncooperative, you talked about the District 60 being uncooperative. Have you had dialogue with them to see if we can get past that, or is that something you're bringing to us to try to figure out? I want to know what you're trying to get us to look at.
We would welcome your assistance because we've tried and we just get brushed off. And there are a lot of problems in District 60 with disability access that we could give them some valuable advice on.
Okay,
District 60 puts the independent in independent school district.
thank you.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
Who was your
Flores?
previous, who was the previous chairman?
I'm sorry?
Who was the previous president of your committee or chairman of?
The chair, you're thinking Kristen Castor,
Yeah,
probably.
Yes,
She was technically the secretary, but in fact the chair, and she got a lot done.
she was in a motorized chair.
Yes,
Yes. She held that position for a long time, didn't she? Maybe
Yes,
10
she did.
years. I just wanted to,
she was in the position since 2003.
so a long time.
Yeah,
My thought is that we should give her some sort of I don't know, proclamation for her work. For
that
the
was
city
done a
meeting.
couple of years ago.
Was it?
Yeah, and she appreciated it very much, and it's framed and on her wall.
That's terrific. Well, I'm glad that we recognize that. I just wanted to make sure that we did because she did. She was always here.
And she
provided a
is
lot of value.
happily retired now. She just gives us old minutes that she finds on her files, and well, she'll answer questions if we have them, but
But
she is
thank you.
very happy to be retired.
Counselor Martinez.
I always like when you come talk to us, Miss Sharon, because you're so honest and I appreciate your candor. So I always like, I like hearing from you. So I have two thoughts. One, our building codes are getting revised right now. The city's in the process of updating our building codes, that I'm almost wondering if now would be a good opportunity to talk about that visitability
Mhm.
standard as we're updating our codes right now.
That would be wonderful opportunity.
The comprehensive land use plan that was adopted, the new land use plan, has a particular section, it's a policy, it's aspirational, but it does urge the community to develop more accessible housing, visible housing, handicap housing,
Hmm.
so that there is more access for all age groups and all disability ranges. And so it's already written into the policy of the comprehensive plan, but like I said, it's aspirational.
Dawn, are you saying then we just take the language from the comp plan and then mirror it in the building codes?
I think it'd be a good start.
Okay. I wonder if, could we work with staff to get that conversation started?
Yeah, I'll talk to Chuck about it tomorrow, and Chuck also sits on the ADA commission as well and
Great.
attends all the
Mhm.
meetings, so he's heavily involved with the conversation.
I'd like to point out a recent missed opportunity. As you know, the Pueblo Urban Renewal Authority recently had a groundbreaking to construct a duplex dwelling on the east side
Mhm.
on some infill construction. And since Pura, Pueblo Urban Renewal Authority, had not had any discussions with the ADA committee prior to doing it, there's a missed opportunity because the lot is perfectly flat. There's no additional grading required. And they've already dug the foundation
Hmm.
and everything's been approved. And I discovered that the ADA should have been involved like 3 or 4 months ago. They can't reverse it now. And that would have added one more accessible dwelling unit to the city's inventory. Now, they're going to be building a second duplex on an adjacent lot. And the ADA committee is hoping we can have a constructive discussion with Pura and have them embrace it as a consideration. We're not asking any developer to make a promise. We're just asking them to make a deliberate determination. Would it be appropriate to do this with this property? Because if you don't do it, it's a missed opportunity. And we've seen homes all over town with various degrees of ramps that people have put on their homes so they can have access in their homes. And I've yet to see a ramp that looks like it was part of the original construction.
Mm. Have you reached out to Jerry yet, Dawn?
We're going to be having a discussion this week.
Great. My next question is in terms of the visitability, which I think is really it's an interesting, I just, being an able-bodied person, I've never given any thought, and that's my own privilege that I don't have to think about that. But for city buildings, are there any city buildings that are currently non-compliant as it relates to visitability?
And I'm not aware of any buildings that do not necessarily have a historical status. Certain historical buildings are exempt,
Okay.
but I'm not aware of any non-historical buildings.
I'd be curious if the ADA, the advisory commission would want to do an audit on all of our city buildings to see about that, or even the new, if our new, I'm assuming our new firehouses or fire stations are going to be
Mhm.
compliant. So that was my other thought. And then for the minute taker for meetings, I'm sure that we can accommodate that ask.
That would be
Brian's shaking his head yes. So I'm
so appreciated. You have no idea.
okay. I think that that's an easy ask that we can get done.
Thank you.
Counselor Latino.
Thank you for your report. In terms of the school district, whom have you spoken with at the school district?
Well, Mr. Latino, as an example, about 2 years ago, we contacted the school district because we heard that there are going to be some changes made to Dutch Clark Stadium. And we placed calls and sent, I think, emails for about 8 months to the person that was in charge of that project involving the new school construction. Nobody ever got back to us. And it wasn't until last fall that we were able to make contact, and we found out that it actually was not the school district that was overseeing that improvement to Dutch Clark Stadium. And we're concerned about the buildings, not the parking lot. We're concerned about the buildings and the stairways and things of that nature. And we discovered that the money that is being used to make those improvements is actually money that was due to the school district and owed by the Urban Renewal Authority. And the Urban Renewal Authority took on the responsibility because School District 60 didn't have the capacity at that time. So we're now in discussions with the Urban Renewal Authority, since they're the ones that are spending the money for the school district. So that, but there are other things we've worked on with the school district where they've been disinterested.
In the Dutch Clark Stadium, when they did renovate it, they have all these wonderful bleachers. But just from a pure liability standpoint, they don't have any handrails. And there are a lot of people who go to the Bell game and the Cannon game, and they're no longer as young as they used to be. But they get out there, they get up those risers, and they're at risk of falling.
It's very dangerous.
It would be difficult to, at Dutch Clark, the way it's structured. I mean, obviously there's place for wheelchairs there. There's places you can get in and out of that. The accessibility is fine. The restrooms are very, they're not. Yes, they are.
Well, they finally put in some accessible porta potties.
Okay. Well, again, in terms of the stadium itself, it would be difficult at the way it was constructed, however many years back it was. And it was when I was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years old, whatever the time was, I can't remember that. They didn't have the accessibility that they have now. I mean, you can put wheelchairs up on the top level. I know that for a fact. The restrooms are accessible to do some of the things. And I'm sorry that they're not responding to you. There's a new superintendent, and if you need some help with that, I'm more than willing to help you with those kinds of things
Thank you.
personally.
Thank
Thank
you.
Okay.
you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Counselor Boston?
Yeah, just doubling back on Sarah's point. A lot of us don't have to think about this, so it's good that there's people out there to represent the individuals that don't, they do have to face these problems every single day. This was actually one of the first concerns that was brought to me by a constituent when I first got onto council. They were referencing Allen Hamel Road right by the Riverwalk. They were disappointed that the only wheelchair accessible points were on either end of the street and there wasn't a ramp in the middle. So if there wasn't a parking spot available on either end, they had to make that trek on the street in their wheelchair to get to one of those handicap accessible ramps. And I did get in contact with Chuck about the possibility of adding a ramp in the middle somewhere on that stretch of Allen Hamel, and never heard anything back from him on that. So I don't know if that's something we can look into further, but if it's something you're not dealing with on a day-to-day basis, it is definitely something you don't even consider, really.
Well, you have to remember, anyone can break a leg. Our former Chamber of Commerce president ended up in a very, very unfortunate situation where he couldn't even get out because he had no knee at all. They put in a knee replacement joint, but it got infected and it was a long, sad journey, but he was really grateful that there were a lot more places that he could go.
We are all temporarily able-bodied. It's a temporary condition. And throughout life, we could break an arm, we could have a knee replacement, we could become permanently disabled, we could become a quadriplegic, and you can't age in place if you can't get in and out of your home.
Okay, Counselor Gomez.
Does anybody from the Pueblo Association of Home Builders sit on your committee?
No, but we would certainly like to have somebody, and also somebody from the rental housing community.
Okay, well, that's important. Another thing, I looked at a ramp at some of these, I was in particular one religious organization, the Temple Emmanuel. I know that's off of, I can't remember, it's off of Grand somewhere, 13th, I think. But they're looking at $200,000 to replace a ramp, and it has to be concrete. It can't be one of the aluminum ones, the rails and the aluminum ramp. And I'm trying to figure out why is that? Because the cost of that's gone beyond 200 grand now. And how does that work? I mean, if they're a religious organization and they're being required, I think it's on the historic, I believe it's on the historic registry. How does that work? I mean,
Under the ADA, religious organizations are exempt. Particularly sad because people with disabilities often need the religious
Right.
comfort more than others. But churches are much more responsive than they used to be. Many of them now have assistive listening systems as they notice their congregation no longer goes to church because they can't understand anything. So it's really impressive that Temple Emmanuel is looking to do that. It's not required. I would like to think that there might be a less expensive way to do that.
It might be a matter of architectural integrity that they're making that type of a ramp, so it doesn't look like a sore thumb.
Good point. Okay, thank you.
Counselor Flores.
Just quickly, it's a legal liability issue. So there's some organizations that take it upon themselves, even if they don't have to, because they've had people fall there before. So they're just a risk management tool and not allowing yourself to be sued once you know people are falling in that area. So that's why Temple Emmanuel did it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for coming this evening. We
You're very
appreciate it.
welcome.
Have a good evening.
Same time next year, different presentation.
All righty. Thank you. And next we have our 2023 city audit with Matthew Marino and Max Haberhorn. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. Did a great job with the pronunciation of Max's last name. You did it correctly, so thank you.
Well, thank you.
Uh,
And it was only because I didn't have my glasses on.
No, it's all good.
Sorry about that.
No, all good. I'm Matt Marino. I was your engagement partner the last several years, and Max Habercorn has been your engagement manager. We're here to report on the results of the audit of the city. The city undergoes an audit every year for several different reasons. Bondholders need it. Your city charter requires it. You also have to submit it to the federal government and the state of Colorado. So we do a couple different audits, and Max will go through the results of that. We do an audit of the financial statements that are prepared by your city staff in assistance with an outsourced accounting firm that helps them with that, as well as because the city receives and expends federal funds, there's a special compliance audit that happens as well, which is commonly called a single audit. And so we'll talk about the results of that as well. So I'll kick it off to Max. He's going to go through the viewpoints document, which I believe you have a copy of in front of you. And that's really our communication to you as auditors, the results of the audit, talk about anything that we need to let you know as far as the rules we follow and all that sort of stuff. But I don't want to take all of Max's thunder. So.
Yeah, thank you all for having us. As Matt was saying, we are going to be looking at this viewpoints document just as for reference. This is what it looks like, at least the title page does. I will start off on what is page 2. The title does say auditor communication at the top. All of this report is baked into it is all of the required communication we're required to give to you under the rules and regulations we follow under the AICPA audits guidelines. And basically what it all says on this page is that we were able to issue an unmodified opinion on your financial statements. That is also known as a clean opinion, which is your A+ as far as audits go. So you couldn't do any better as far as you going through the process of the audit and coming out on the other side. It's a testament to the work that your finance department does and the people that you put in place to, collect this information, gather it, and then present it as such in the process of, the city's annual reporting requirements. The other two things that we issue are reports on the city's internal control over compliance. That's called a Yellow Book opinion. It's another opinion that we issue. Again, there were no issues reportable on that one. And then as Matt was saying, because the city does spend more than $750,000 of federal funds in any given year, we do a single audit. And that single audit report, again, is unmodified and there was no reportable findings on that one. So across the board, A+ for the city. moving on to the next page, really very briefly talking about the policies and some of the disclosures within the city's financial statements. The policies for the accounting principles used by the city are consistent year over year. There was one significant change that did happen during the year. It was an implementation of a new required accounting standard, Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement number 96, which is related to subscription-based IT arrangements. Basically, what those are leasing of software from third-party vendors, long-term arrangements that are greater than a year or more at the beginning of those. Basically, what ended up happening with those are that they're being capitalized. So you have what we call a right to use asset, which is an intangible asset, basically the representation of being able to use that system over a long period of time, the same way you would use a building and you would amortize that or depreciate that over time, offset with the liability, the long-term payment schedule related to any of those agreements. So those are two significant changes that happened during the year, but no other significant accounting policies or any other unusual transactions were entered into during the year. The other thing we do like to highlight as part of our communications are any disclosures that may be significant or unusual in nature for a financial statement. Of those, we've noted that some of the more substantial disclosures are the fair value of investments in Note 3-A, the very long pension disclosures in Note 3G with all of your various pension and OPEB plans that the city does participate in. There's leases disclosure in Note 3B and I, and then risk management in 4A and commitments and contingencies in 4C. Moving on to the next page, we are required to report to you significant accounting estimates. Accounting estimates are something where it's not just black and white. It's something where management does have to make some level of decision-making process to arrive at the number that's being used in the financial statements, or is a third party that comes in and makes some sort of determination or estimate that is brought in and then used as the information that's being presented in your financial statements. That significant estimate is the estimate of your net pension asset or liability and all related obligations for either your pension plan or your OPEB plans in accordance with GASB statements number 68 and 75. And then along those lines, we evaluate the key factors and assumptions being used by both the actuary for those plans and for the auditors that do the review of that plan. And based on that information, we felt that it was comfortable to use the information that was presented in the financial statements. And then the next page talks about corrected and uncorrected misstatements. We're required to, as we go through the process of the audit, to determine whether or not that there was anything, wrong in the materially wrong with any of the financial records of the city. This is where we would communicate that whether or not it was something that was material, significant enough that we needed to post a journal entry, or determined to be immaterial by us in management. That would be something called a past journal entry, which is something that is technically incorrect, but is not something that is something we require it to issue a clean audit opinion. The good news is that there were no uncorrected misstatements. So there were any of those adjustments that we passed on. There was an entry that we did find related to the reconciliation of some HUD grants, but that was cleaned up by management during the audit process. And to be honest with you, this could be a lot longer of a communication. And the fact that it's one journal entry that was found during the audit process is actually an incredibly impressive thing to do. I'll bring Matt in and speak a little bit more about that.
Well, why is that important too? If there's a lot of journal entries that are required during the audit process, that could be indicative that information you're receiving throughout the year may not be as accurate as you might want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely important to give them kudos for that. Your team works very hard in concert with the outsourced accounting people to make sure that all of the adjustments are made as timely as possible. As far as the overall audit process, I do want to touch on why we're here in September. Your management team did make us aware that they were a little bit behind of where they wanted to be. They did not surprise us with that. We knew that was coming. So we were aware back in late spring that was going to be a delay. We appreciate the heads up. We look forward to getting back onto a regular time period going forward, but that is why we are here in September and not hopefully June in the future.
And then finally, just a few other things that there were no circumstances that affected any of our, the form of our auditor's report. There was no significant matters that required consultation outside of the engagement team, basically anybody outside of what of me and Matt and our team, and no significant difficulties in dealing with management. As Matt said, it was very easy to work with everybody at the city, and they were very fair and clear about when they were going to be ready with the information, even though that was on a delayed time frame. So other than that, that basically concludes our major auditor communications at this point. Is there any specific questions?
Hold on. I will go over one more thing too. We need to wrap around. As we mentioned, we did the federal funds audit with regard to that too. And so the program that we did audit was what's commonly called fiscal recovery funds, or ARPA. So that was the program we did audit. We didn't find anything that we need to report to you as far as material misuse. You had controls in place when you needed to. That program will likely continue to be audited until it's fully exhausted for most entities at this point. And that's kudos to you all. I know in the past we've had some findings. I think the last 2 years we've had clean single audits, so that's good. That should mean that we should achieve a low risk auditee status, which means that you can have less of your federal funds looked at, which is kind of like a reward for having clean audits with regard to federal expenditures.
Any specific questions about our required auditor communications?
Any questions,
Mhm.
Counselor Flores?
One of the significant changes under GASB was the way entities like ours, government entities, reflect or report their pension plans.
Yeah.
And it was very significant, but obviously you're saying that it's meeting all the standards and
Right.
We've got a clean audit, but could you kind of clarify that in my mind, what GASB is actually saying and how we're complying, I guess, with GASB?
Yeah, I'll start off, Max, and you can clean up anything I might miss. So with regard to pensions and OPEB, which is other post-employment benefit obligations, what the GASB statements basically said is we need to measure the future benefits we're going to provide a given party. And we need to basically say, okay, we need to provide these people benefits 30 years in the future, and we need to discount it back to current day. And then we basically need to say, what do we have for assets available to provide those benefits? And if there's a gap between what we think we're going to have to pay for somebody and what we actually have on hand today, you would pick up what's called a liability. Or if you have more assets than what you think you're going to have to pay, you would have an asset. So I do want to be clear. The city funded what was required to be funded with regard to those plans. Actuaries help determine whether funding needs to be increased, decreased, changes. But the standards really wanted to make it clear if a plan was underwater because you had more things you needed to give people in the future, but as compared to the assets you currently have, sometimes decisions need to be made. But your actuaries are there for that. But the biggest thing I want people to understand is it's not just because you have a liability currently does not mean that the city didn't meet its obligations to fund the plans. That's based on the recommendations of the actuaries and the people running those plans.
One of the things that we pride ourselves in Pueblo is our bond rating. Tell us how important these two clean audits last year and this year, or 23 now, are to the bond rating that we have. We have, I would consider, very low debt for a community our size, and a very good bond rating. But could you elaborate on that?
Yes, I'll start with, and then Max can clean anything else up on that. So as part of your preparing your financial statements, the city does submit to the GFOA, or the Government Finance Officers Association Certificate of Excellence program. So obviously running the city in a fiscally responsible way is one way that it is you obtain your bond rating, but also making sure you provide full and very transparent financial statements that are full of a lot of information, which the GFOA certificate thing makes sure you do. Not every entity does the GFOA certificate. You all have done it for many, many years. It's not a small amount of work. And so that is part of it as well. So making sure that you do that and continue that helps maintain that bond rating, because the bonding agencies typically do like to see the GFOA excellence certificate attached to your financial statements.
Thanks for clarifying both of those.
Okay, Counselor Gomez.
Yeah, and the magic word in reference to transparency and just again, trying to let my constituency learn what I'm trying to learn. What do we pay for an annual audit?
I would have to go look at it correctly, but it's ranges from year to year depending on how many federal expenditure programs we have. The contract has a certain amount that are included in that, but it's not an insubstantial amount of money because it is.
What was it last year?
I believe our engagement fee was $140,000.
Okay, 140,000. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, with that being said, I guess we're done with the discussion. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming.
Wait.
Oh, we have a couple more slides. There was a good natural break.
I was just asking.
All of a sudden you ask questions.
It's all right.
Well, there was a good natural break between maybe talking about the past and talking about the future.
Oh,
So,
okay.
I've been in public accounting about 20 years. The Governmental Accounting Standards Board has been busy issuing standards, as was just talked about. So Max is going to talk about one of them. Luckily, the standards that will need to be implemented for the 2024 calendar year are not as burdensome and laborious as maybe the last couple of years have been with leases, the OPEB, or not the OPEB, the SBITAs, all that sort of stuff. But we do want to talk about it just because we're here to be advisors. We do call balls and strikes, but we're also here to help when we need to provide additional context and guidance to make sure that the city understands the accounting ramifications of the new standards.
Yeah, so Matt isn't referring to GASB statement number 101, which is related to compensated absences. That change in recognition of, compensated absences is related to making sure that the liability is reflective of what the government is going to have to, outlay in the future, whether or not that's a long-term or short-term liability. This was more meant to reflect some governments who have more, I would say, exotic long-term leave plans. It's not something that's we believe is going to have a substantial effect on the city's estimates of its compensated absences liability as it stands right now. So I would say by this time next year, we'll probably say nothing really has changed for what the city is doing. But it is something just to be aware of, that there could be some things that we look into a little bit more in depth next year, just in relation to that compensated absences liability.
And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't really plead for all of you to kind of keep abreast of what the Governmental Accounting Standards Board is issuing for standards, because really it should be useful to you all that govern, the citizens. I understand it. I have a CPA. It's what I do all day, every day. But I don't know that the common public person can pick up the financial statements and really understand what they're seeing there. And so there's a lot of standards out there that maybe don't make sense for everybody. And we comment on all the time as auditors and practitioners, but I think they don't get as many comments from city councils, citizens, and so on, saying that's all nice, but I don't really understand what the standard's telling me. Thank you.
Any more questions? Yes.
What we're talking about here about compensated absences, these are dollars that are given to someone that's retired or leaves for whatever reason, and they're given, it's almost like they didn't use their full amount, so they get compensated for not being absent. I guess that's the way of putting it.
Correct. Or it could be some entities use like personal time and sick and vacation, and they have a lot of different things in it. This standard was meant to provide some clarity on which of those types of compensation do need to be accrued as a liability and which ones would not need to be, because maybe they don't carry with the person once they leave, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was on council 6 years ago where we had a very significant amount that was given to unemploy. So it's just a matter of how you record that, I guess, going into the future. That's
Correct. And really there's trying to understand like how near term some of that is and whether that would need to show up in your fund financials. I mean, by and large, a lot of it is already in your government-wide full accrual financial statements, but there are many entities that have other compensated absences that just didn't fit in the normal bucket. And so this, when GASB finds something that isn't well accounted for, they usually issue a new standard. So.
One more
Okay.
question.
Counselor Gomez.
Yeah, again, this is a novice question, but I guess I get more concerned with things that are done when we send money out and we do audits and all this kind of stuff. Is anybody responsible from what you do to look at programs once they're given money and they have goals, objectives, tasks they have to meet, tasks they have to meet, and they got to meet, say, a grant, or they got to meet funds that come in. Who does the follow-up? I know the money comes up front. I'm always worried about once they get it. What's the process? Do you have anything to do with that at all?
So when there's federal funding, we're most definitely going to be auditing programs on a rotating basis. So, but also as part of the normal audit process, if there's significant amounts of money that are bonded debt or other debt that's issued for a project, we usually would like to see that that project is being progressed through with that money. So that is part of the audit process. Not every program is going to get looked at, but it is on a rotating basis and a risk-based. And we didn't necessarily delve into risk assessment, but really what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to say what's changed at the city, what might be difficult to account for, and we're supposed to audit more in those areas. And the things that are more routine, we still audit, but we're not going to dig and turn over the stones at quite the rate that we would for the more difficult and risky. So federal funds, state funds, restricted funds, stuff like that.
So if that kind of red flag comes up, right? And it's brought to the attention of the city, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so then the point after that, they're following up with what their measurements say they should be at a certain time, a certain date. That all has been handled by them, has nothing to do with you guys, correct?
We take it into consideration when we're forming our audit, but we don't necessarily follow up unless it has a specific audit risk associated with it, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, finally tonight, our final speaker is from the, we're going to be speaking about the 2025 non-departmental budget request overview with Mayor Graham and our nonprofit compliance coordinator, Melissa Nearson. Thank you, Melissa. Sorry.
Thank you, Council. You all received all of this information that I have in front of me tonight. A one-pager from each of the non-departmental asks, and then you have a jump drive that has all of this information. So this was all the information that we dove into to make the recommendations that you're going to see here tonight. This was very different than any non-departmental request has been in previous years. We asked some very specific questions, such as how many employees some of these nonprofits had, their funding request information, what the funding would be used for, what previous funding had been used for, their organizational background, their goals, current programs, impacts and results, collaboration, who their board members are, how they govern, who their volunteers are, what planning looks like, audits that they had to submit to us, year-to-date financial statements, tax forms, all of their major contributors, in-kind donations, and then they also had to provide a letter on what their nonprofit does and how they help the city and what kind of contributions they make to citizens, and what that looks like. So I'll let Melissa take it from here and talk a little bit about what she discovered, my recommendations to you based off the information that has been provided for us, and then kind of get some direction moving forward.
Am I on?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you, everyone. Okay, we will go ahead and get started. So today we're going to look at the types of requests that are received by the city. We're going to go briefly over the history of the non-departmental requests, how these have been handled in the past. We're going to look at the process that we use this year for reviewing applications, discuss, as the mayor said, the future of the non-departmental requests, and then ultimately look at our recommendations that you all should have, that should have been passed out earlier this evening. So in the review of this process, what I did is I really bucketed these requests into 3 different types of requests. So the first one is going to be discretionary funding that really they don't have a contract with the city. They don't necessarily provide a direct service to the city, although they may provide a service to those within the city. What I'm calling ongoing appropriations, where they don't have a contract with the city, but it's something that we should generally fund. And I'll give you examples of all of these. And then our actual contractual obligations. And so if we look at our contractual obligations, they're listed here. There's actually only one of our contractual obligations that has a dollar amount associated with it. The others are just services that are required. For our ongoing appropriations, this would be things like the County Health Department, State Fair, the Fountain Creek Watershed District. And then for the discretionary nonprofit funding, I'm not going to list all of these here, but these are the ones that we have no contract with the city, nor are they providing a direct service to the city, only to the city's residents. And so this, I don't expect you to actually be able to read anything on here, but what I wanted to show you was the trends of funding over the last several years. So the first year listed here is 2013, and it goes through 2023. The gray grayed-in boxes and the red boxes are our contractual agreements, as well as our ongoing appropriations. If you look at our blue, that is the discretionary funding that one of the things we're discussing tonight. And you can really see that from 2018 through 2023, these dollars became more and more, and it became more common to be associating or to be paying these directly from the city's budget. So previously to this, the process previous to this year, I do think there was a lack of transparency in the model of the discretionary nonprofit funding. There was no online application, and the actual process or the accepted process for nonprofits to come to the city for a budget allocation was simply just a letter to the mayor. If you were to look online, it would actually point you back to CSAC. And so there was just a lack of transparency where it could have been done better. There are potentially nonprofit partners who may not have known that this was an option. I do also think that there was an overlapping process because, of course, we have CSAC, and that was what was really created for this discretionary funding. And there are situations, which I outlined in the budget book or in the non-departmental budget book that you received about 4 weeks ago, where organizations did receive both CSAC as well as dollars from the city's appropriation. And so what we did this year, and this is just hopefully one step in the ultimate goal, but we wanted to increase that transparency. So prior to my coming on board with the city, the mayor's office created an online streamlined process where all of these organizations could come in and apply. It created consistency because it did require certain documentation from all of the organizations that were looking for assistance. And it created a consistent review process because we had the same baseline for everyone and we had all the same documents for everyone. And so during this review process, we looked at several things. There was more things that we looked at than what's outlined here. But in general, we wanted to first make sure that the organization was in good standing. So we went to the Secretary of State, made sure that they were a nonprofit in good standing, that they filed their 990s. We looked at their financial health. So we requested their most recent audit. We looked at any findings that they may have or any comments that they may have. We wanted to make sure that it was an unmodified opinion, not a qualified opinion. If there were findings or material misstatements, we wanted to make sure that those would not necessarily impact the funding that they received or were applying for through the city. We also, as the mayor said, wanted to look and see if there are significant donors. We wanted to compare that to the future budget to make sure that there were not any significant donors that maybe were left out of the information that they gave us. So we really were trying to do this holistic view. In addition, when we evaluated that request, we were looking to see if they did have a budget shortfall. There are some that showed that they didn't have a budget shortfall, but yet were coming to the city for funding that in theory would just be put into reserves. And so it doesn't make sense that the city would be funding that out of a direct budget appropriation. We also wanted to evaluate their previous year's budgets, the percentage of the request versus their total annual budget. It all just paints a whole picture of what the request really is for that organization. And then the second piece to this is monitoring. And so this is still under development and this has not yet been deployed. But what we're in the process of doing is creating a subrecipient risk assessment. This model will evaluate 28 different risk factors. So just like the previous speaker here tonight, looking at doing monitoring based on a risk assessment to make sure that you can do more in-depth monitoring for those higher risk subrecipients of the city, and a much less invasive monitoring for those that may receive $5,000 from the city. We also, so once we do that subrecipient risk assessment, we will complete an annual review. This review, as I mentioned, may be extremely in-depth or not so in-depth, but depending on what that risk assessment does look at. But it's at that time that we will reevaluate the financial health. We'll look at their internal controls and just make sure that the dollars were spent as they intended to be. And so what we want to talk about is the future. What we definitely want to set the stage with is the future and what this looks like going forward. And so we are right now exploring options for these discretionary dollars. Now, as a reminder, these are the ones that do not have a direct contract with the city, but then they are not providing a direct service to the city. We are looking at in future years, possibly just not funding any of these and sending them to CSAC, which is where they initially would be funded through. We have not had conversations yet, but we intend on having conversations with the county, who of course jointly funds CSAC, to see if they would be willing to make an adjustment to that. And that would help with the nonprofits that are coming if there were additional dollars there. I will say that the CSAC timeline is very similar to the city's budget timeline. So this year, the RFA was issued for CSAC on August 19th and it closed on September 20th. So CSAC funding applications did close 10 days ago. And then the last two slides you do have, but these are the final funding recommendations based on those three categories. So this first one is that discretionary nonprofit funding. We're recommending a total of $660,890 from there. $4.45 million for the contractual obligations and $1.46 million for ongoing appropriations. And I can go through each of these if you'd rather. I think you all have this information, but those are the end of my slides.
And I just want to add, so tonight I gave you a two-sheeter in front of you that it looks like this. This is what you're gonna see on the 15th when I present the budget to you. This is the estimate of the B1. And what I want to direct you to is the numbers that I've highlighted so you can see the contractual agreements, which Melissa spoke about, that we have contractual amounts with, such as the zoo, HSPPR, the chamber to an extent, HARP, the airport museum, and a couple more that I'm missing on there. But that's where you're gonna see on that green line item, the $4.9 million. And then if you go down to the other contributions and donations, you can see from 2022 to the 2025 proposed that I have significantly cut that back almost in half. And that 755,000, we had a couple adjustments since this B1 was provided. So it's gonna be even a little bit lower now, 660,000. So in this, as what you see, 755,000, this also accounts for the 490,000 for CSAC funding. Then if you go down to where we have the fund balance, what you're gonna see in the yellow is everything that myself and the finance department have gone through with each department now wages, operating costs, and what that looks like as a deficit for the city of Pueblo. So next year's budget, based on a flat rate with no increased sales tax, and no decreased sales tax, hopefully, we are about $8 million in the hole that we will have to take out, of reserves to balance the budget for 2025. And this is, I remind you, at a flat sales tax. This isn't a decrease, and I know that you've been receiving the sales tax report for the last few months, and that we have seen a decrease in sales tax for this year. This year's budget was built on a 4.2% increase, 2024's budget. The sales tax is at a negative 0.06 right now. So we're trending in a not good position for 2024, and that's why we decided to flatline the budget for 2025 to get a more accurate view of what you will see and what we will be spending in 2025. Over the last 5 years, that has not been the case. The sales tax was increased year after year to try to balance the budget, but we know with inflation and people spending less money that has not been the case. And in 2024, we approved a budget of $132 million, even though we were only projected to receive $122 million. And you can see that $10 million came out in 23, and then probably again in 24, depending on what sales tax. And the reason I bring this up is because if you take this decrease in fund balance and you look at the future appropriation at the bottom, and you see the 23 million that we have in fund balance for future appropriations, if we keep spending essentially the way that we've been spending for the last several years, that fund balance is going to decrease if we don't grow our sales tax number or come up with other revenue sources. And so when we talk about the non-departmentals, we combed through these to see which ones we thought should be funded based off of the services that they provide to the community. Previously, we were funding larger amounts because the city was taking in a tremendous amount of money over the last few years, but that is no longer the case. And I do not think that that's going to be the case moving forward. And that is why we cut these non-departmental budgets down to something more minimal and more manageable, so that the city continues to survive and we don't have to empty our reserves to pay our bills. So happy to take any questions. I know that was a lot. And we can go in depth if you want, line by line, and talk about if you have certain questions on requests or how they were presented.
Counselor Flores.
I did quite a bit of work on this for one reason, and that is, and this is all my work, but I really believe that there's really three categories here. And we're really talking about entities that are all nonprofit. So I categorized them as A, B, and C. And A was basically 6 entities, and that was the police department, the Colorado State Fair, Fountain Creek Watershed, HARP, PACOG, and the health department. Now, those are all nonprofits or quasi-government or government, like in the case of the police department. But that amounted to almost 1.7 million right there. So you could say, those are nonprofits, we're going to lump them in with everything else. And I don't think they should be, because these are all agreements that the city got into, like HARP, like PACOG, which, by the way, we get 7 votes. Everyone else, like the county, gets 3 votes, and all the other smaller entities get 1 vote. So that's how that's calculated. And that was missing on the sheet, even though they did request $57,000. Yeah, I was working off of the sheet you gave me last week. And was this the first time we've seen this?
Yes, these are, so in this, these non-departmental, so you have PACOG, CML, Colorado National League of Cities, Latino Chamber, Mayor Contingencies, Council Contingencies.
Those are membership dues, aren't they?
Yes, and
Yeah,
that's where
that-
PACOG falls.
Yeah, fine. But it was on this sheet that I was given last week, as though it were part of the nonprofits that we're talking about. And all I'm saying is that it doesn't sound like, well, first of all, I came up with a figure of 5.5% if you add all of the categories and all of the entities that you gave us last week. And this particular segment, which I call category A, that in itself represents about 0.013% of all of the money that we give nonprofits. Now, the other category is what I call category B, and this is the one I really have trouble with. And this is HSPPR, Mountain Park Discovery Center, the Sangre de Cristo Arts and Conference, and the Pueblo Zoo. These are nonprofits that are doing the work of what the city should be doing. In fact, in years past, the zoo was run by the city. The animal shelter was run by the city. So was the Beulah Mountain Park, which is called Mountain Park Discovery Center, and the Arts Center. All of those were really kind of controlled by the city. And that's like 3.5 million, or almost 2.5% of all the nonprofit money. But why I'm disturbed by this portion is that these organizations should be treated like any other department in the city. As an example, 2 years ago, we had to give the zoo enough money to meet the minimum, their minimum wage that was increased. And they still struggle keeping people because they haven't been able to get the raise that every department in the city has got. So if you take the zoo and you say, we're going to treat them differently now because, we just don't have the money because we gave it to all the departments in the city. Now we have nothing left. At what point, like I noticed too, that you put $75,000 for a pump they needed. I don't know if you're aware, all of those assets belong to the city. So it's up to the city to fix that pump, not them. That's not part of their contract. Again, if you look at all of these four, you will note that they're caring for the assets that belong to the city. They don't own the buildings. They don't own the land. They don't own, in most cases, the business personal property they need to operate. So when you remove 3.5 million out of this nonprofit sheet that you have, I don't think they belong there. And I sent Harley and Carla a note indicating that these are contracts that have to be negotiated. It doesn't make sense for the 7 of us up here to negotiate a contract of whether you're going to cut 300, you're going to not give the Arts Center any money. This takes negotiation. It doesn't take a spur of the moment decision by the 7 of us. And by the way, this is the first time I've complained about this, and it hasn't been changed much. And then you go to category C, and that's the smaller amount. That's all of there's 22 on that list of money that we give, but it only represents 0.016. If you really want to take money away, I guess that's where you do it. But it's such a small amount when you figure that we've contractually agreed, for the state fair. And by the way, somewhere down the line, somebody has to say, yeah, we should give the state fair 250,000. They probably bring in 10, think of all the sales tax they bring in. Same way with HARP. And then we have an obligation for the health department I think that's their number one duty that we have as city council people, is the safety and of the community. So I wanted that as a preamble because I do have a lot of questions regarding specific things that you've done here, but I don't want to dominate the time. I'm going to I'm gonna defer right now for the time being, but I do have about 5 or 6 questions at the end after everybody else has been able to talk. Losing my voice.
Thank you, Counselor Flores. Counselor Gomez.
Yeah, I'm just curious, well, obvious from the books there, you either get, as counselors, we either get little information initially, and then you were kind enough to give me both books, and I wrote the wrong book, of course. And then look at it, that giant book you have there, is that a foot thick? So it's either too much information. So I'm just curious, in reference to the contractual, I'm gonna ask for, hopefully, some of the constituents that may not be able to follow this, including me. When we talk about contractual obligation, and if we look at the Pikes Peak Human Society, and the request was 2,109,000, and then the recommendation is 1,848,000. Is that due to negotiations down to that? Or is that the recommendation? This is the ask and this is what you're getting.
Yeah, sure. So when you look at under the request line, the 2.1 million, that's their request. They have a contractual binding agreement with the city of Pueblo that's renegotiated every 3 years. And they get an additional 3% every year it grows. That's why you see the number go up a little bit over the last 4 years.
Right.
Their contractual amount that the city is obligated to pay is $1.8 million. So their request was 300,000 more than their contractual obligated amount. So we are telling the council, my recommendation is we pay the contractual obligated amount.
Okay, and you made a statement in reference to about 8 million going into the reserves.
Mhm.
So if I did my math right, it's 21 million. We've got 20 million in it, correct?
We have 23.
Oh, 23 million. So we're kind of in danger land now when we're looking at that.
So if we keep up with the trajectory of what this budget even shows, flatline spending, and we've had some months that have had sales tax that's been at an increase, we will empty the reserves over 3 years if we keep up with $8 million a year out of reserves.
So the 23 million, from what I'm trying to learn, we also have some set-in contingencies at the end of that entire reserve balance.
Yeah.
What are those numbers at the end of this that I'm having a problem finding?
15 million. So it's gonna be on the bottom line after it says the fund balance appropriation.
Okay.
If you look up at the 2 lines above, you have your Tabor emergency reserve at 3 million and council designated reserve at 12 million.
Okay, is it gonna come to the point where we're gonna have to either go to departments and ask them to look at cutting their budgets and bringing it back? Is that what we're looking at?
We did that this year. So
Okay.
we went line by line. That's how you've seen the dollar amount shrink. Last year it was $10 million in the hole. This is around 8 million right now. This is with the police wage increase, the 10% and the 7%. This is with the fire department 7% increase, and this is with the Page Union's 2.8% increase. And in the operating, it also has the PD's roughly $1 million additional operating. So we took the budget down significantly, over what it was last year. What I also will mention going into this is in previous years, we had really large capital improvement budgets. So last year, our capital improvement plan was $12 million. This year's capital improvement plan is only $3 million. And we only did capital for the interest that was collected off the 1/2-cent sales tax. And that is, I think I'll be presenting that to you in the next couple weeks, and I'll go into more depth and explain to you how we get that number. But we've significantly cut back on capital improvement projects and budgets, and we're still $8 million into the reserves.
Well, for what it's worth, the last time we were here, I had talked and I had I call her fearsome nearsome now, because I'm telling you, when I read this, I never brought the wrong book, but when I went through this, and I'm not happy that a lot of people are getting cut, or I'm just wondering how the process works and because I don't know, in reference to learning this process, it gets a little bit difficult, a little complex, but I just want to say thank you for what you've done at this point. And if I bring the right book, we can figure out some more. Thank you.
Counselor Martinez?
So Ms. Nearson, I have a couple questions. One, you said earlier, you talked a little bit earlier about a county adjustment to CSAC. Are you talking about increasing the halvesies that would go with them for CSAC contributions?
Yes, and I would just like to be very clear that we have not had that conversation with the county yet, but that is something that we're looking at possibly for next year so that none of these have to hit the city's budget.
And remind me what we pay right now for CSAC?
480,000 each.
Are we contractually obligated? Is that a contractual agreement? How is that negotiated?
Yeah,
I think it's just an MOU between the county and the city.
How is that number identified though?
I'm not sure. President Aliff, I think that was done in your time. I don't know if you know the number and why.
There was an agreement, and I believe there's an IGA between the city and the county. When CSAC was originally
Mhm.
set up, the county doesn't pay as much as the city does.
Oh, it's not halfsies.
No, it's not halfsies. Plus, they get a administration fee out of the money
Hmm.
because they're the administrative branch
Mhm.
over CSAC. We reduced it a few years ago because they reduced theirs.
Hmm.
We were at 600,000, I believe, in 2020, 21. And then the county reduced how much money they were putting into CSAC, and we reduced our amount. But it is an agreement between both.
So it's been flat funded since 2021 then?
I believe so. It
Okay.
was 21 or 20, I'm 21 or 22. It's always been flat funded,
Okay.
but it was just the difference between the amount.
And then can you remind me, so all of this information, like, when you collected the financials for all of the contracts and your three categories, Clyde, can we go back to this slide where it had it over time from 2017 to 2023? Yeah. Can we make that the whole screen? It's not a thing tonight. Okay.
So you're right.
So I guess it's really interesting to me to look at this, to see that the blue, which is the discretionary funds, really start to have a presence starting in 2018. You mentioned something earlier that said that for the contracts, only one has an actual dollar amount. Which one is that?
HSPPR.
And none of our other contracts have a negotiated dollar amount.
Just services.
Why is that? It's just the way that it's been. I mean, for 2026, like Counselor Flores said, that we probably need to go back and look at what our contracts are and put dollar amounts to all of them so that year in, we don't have to, go through the budget every single time. It's just your contractual dollar amount, whether that's based on COLA or what that is. But everybody but HSPPR is just a service agreement, not a actual dollar amount. The chamber specifically states, I think it was from 1982, it's in your book, that whatever dollar amount that we provided the chamber, whatever dollar amount, and didn't specify a dollar amount, that 55% of it had to be used for marketing, and 45% of it could be used for salaries and personnel. So most of these contracts are very dated. The HART maintenance agreement, I can specifically talk to as well. We have an IGA with the county, the city, Waterworks, Conservancy District, and Urban Renewal. And those are based off of a 60-40 percentage over the total budget. So it's as if the budget is presented and then the city pays 60% of what that budget amount is. So there's instances like that. And then there's instances where there's no dollar amount, no percentage at all, just that we have a service agreement like we do the zoo.
I mean, Counselor Flores brings up an interesting point regarding those negotiations and how putting a dollar amount within those contracts for those contracts that we have would be an interesting thing, because then at least you're tied to that minimum amount, you know? And there's actually like not an ROI, but like a cost per service. So that's interesting that you brought that up. Okay, my last question is, as Ms. Nearson, you were going through all these financials. I was raised in a nonprofit household. Can you talk a little bit about how, looking at the financials, there's the difference, most nonprofits take in all these donations, but sometimes they're obligated for, or like restricted, they have maybe like all this money that they're sitting on, but it's a restricted fund such that they can only be spent on a very specific purpose. Can you talk a little bit about how that factored into your decision making?
Yeah, so all of that's listed in their audit reports or on their 990, I mean, on their financial reports. It is listed whether or not it's a restricted fund or a non-restricted fund. And so you could see what is cash or cash equivalents that would be, reserve amounts that they have immediate access to. And that is defined as well in their audit report, what cash and cash equivalents is. So what they consider, whether it's immediate access within 90 days or 120 days, it's defined in there. So that was taken into consideration.
Council President Aliff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've argued for a long time that that council just needs to make a decision on either you have CSAC or you don't have CSAC. If we want to fund every nonprofit, go through this process every year, then we need to set a dollar amount, take all of our money out of CSAC. We need to stop our agreement with the county and be our own monitor on programs. Or we go and we fund CSAC the way that it should be funded along with the county, and we cut off this policy that started in earnest in 2018 of anybody could come back to the city regardless of whether they went to CSAC. CSAC literally came into several meetings and thoroughly ticked off. We empower them as government through the city and county to do exactly what Ms. Nearson's doing. Yep. They take it very seriously. They go out and they vet all of the nonprofits that apply. They do their own reporting, and then they allocate the money based upon their report. And I don't know why we would do it twice. I just don't think that is a very good use of dollars, and I think that it could be done in a very different way. I have spoken to a couple of county commissioners, and they're in the same boat. We set up CSAC because city council back in the day didn't want to go through this, didn't want to have to make those decisions. They thought it made more sense between the county commissioners and the city council that they create CSAC, they handle it. And the county's in the same boat we are, where they still get tons of requests and things like that. So I think they're very interested. They're very interested in doing something as soon as possible. We control CSAC, even though I'll give you an example of what could happen. What could happen is that we put in our budget another 200,000 or 250,000 or 160,000, whatever city council decides, on top of our 490,000. The county in turn adds some of their money to CSAC. CSAC reopens the applications for this year for the funding in 2025, and then we're just done with that part of it. To me, that makes the most sense because it's how it was intended. And if we don't want to do that, then I think we need to go to the county and we need to abolish CSAC, open up our own way of doing things, and just do this every year, except on steroids, because there'd be a lot more applications because you essentially have a lot more money. You'd have the 490,000 plus something else. And then once that money's gone, it's gone. And that's probably the way that it should be because that's what was budgeted. The other question I have, and I know we're kind of at a disadvantage because we don't, and I know that this wasn't meant to be a budget discussion. But one very concerning thing right off the bat is that council reserve was dropped 2%. I don't think there was much discussion of that, but I imagine there's going to be discussion of that when it comes to the budget process. That's all I have.
I'm in agreement with Counselor Aliff. We should be doing either one or the other. It's very difficult to do that within the city. I know that, and maybe he could confirm this, is that the reason they took it out of the city council's hands and the city's hands was because of, picking their favorite people. And then it started to be, they were arguing over, well, this person wasn't picked and they should have been picked. And then that's how it grew again outside of CSAC. From what I could tell from previous meetings. I mean, I've heard counselors in the past say that. So one or the other needs to be done. And my concern is, when we talk about depleting the capital improvement budget by 10 million, what are we specifically depleting? Where are we at with roads?
So we have some, in 2021, 2022, and 2023, not all of the $10 million was spent. So you had in a couple of the capital improvement projects, 800 to $1 million that was still outstanding and not spent. So we combine those projects plus the highway user tax for 2025 is going to get us about $5 million in roads. That'll be outside of the $3.3 million. We're just reusing funds that were in capital projects over the years that had not been spent. So for 2026, if the budget continues the way that it's going, we are going to have an issue when it comes to paving roads.
Mhm. And where are we at with, what else are we cutting from on capital improvements?
Well, the capital improvements are just what we set them as, so we're not cutting any significant projects. It's just what we decide for the capital for that year. We wanted it to be more manageable too. When you look at $12 million in capital improvements, there's several projects in 2024 that were budgeted and never even started at this point. So that money will also be reverted back when it comes time to pass the budget. And you'll see some of the projects be closed out because they never got to them. And that's been a trend over the last several years that I've been able to see, that we have tons of capital improvement projects every year, but we just don't have the capacity to do them. So we looked at all of these projects probably over the last 5 years, went through every line item and account and seeing when the last time the project was even tapped into. Combining the accounts now, so there'll be more money that goes back into the fund balance because of these projects being closed out.
Okay. And then what about what was it the contractual agreements? We talk about the contractual agreements, but there's city departments that are taking cuts also.
Right.
So, it's not that, I don't think you're picking on the capital and the contractual agreements. It's there's cuts being across the board. Correct.
Yeah, that's correct. We've cut several departments down. Several departments asked for more funding and we did not provide the funding. We had, I think, 20 additional positions that were requested by city departments. And like I told you last week, we chose not to allocate any funding for additional positions besides the new fire station. So we had to make significant cuts and tell people no this year, which hasn't been done in the past. So it's not just our non-departmentals or our contractuals that have been cut back. It's our own city departments that have been cut back. It's staffing that's been cut back. When I present the budget to you, you're going to see that we abolished 12 full-time positions that will give us an extra $500,000 back to the general fund every year because we didn't feel like those positions were in need anymore in the city. So we've taken significant cuts
Mhm.
in-house as opposed to what we've done out in our contractual obligations as well.
Okay. And then, and that's the other thing too. We didn't even anticipate, we're not even getting the anticipated revenue in order to cover the expenses for last year. Counselor Flores, are you ready for another question?
I have a
I
question.
think,
Okay.
yeah, I'll
um,
wait.
Counselor
Thank you.
Lucino.
And looking at this budget here, I've served on the Community Services Advisory Commission. And there's a number of organizations in here that are coming to us for money and also going to them for money, which means they're double dipping. I have a hard time with that. I really have a hard time with that. When it comes to young people, children, kids, we need to do everything we possibly can. But when organizations are coming to you not once, but twice, and you're giving to them through the Community Services Advisory Commission, and then they turn around and they're asking for money from the city, man, I have a hard time with that. I really do. That means that they need to look at how they're budgeting their money, their financial operations, the accounting operations, however you want to categorize it. You know, that's very concerning to me.
Yeah, Counselor Latino, I can tell you too on, these one shooters that Melissa provided for you for each of the non-departmentals. It also will tell you since 2021 if they had CSAC approvals, other city funding, and some of that we've seen ARPA, some of these non-departmentals we've given ARPA to over the last 4 years. And then if they get mayor or council contingencies, if they're coming and asking. So she did a really thorough job in describing to the council on what other city funds they get. Some of these non-departmentals, the city funds 80% of their budget. So it was really interesting to take a look at on some of these asks, especially if they were doing an increased ask when the city is already funding the majority of their budget.
I mean, we haven't increased our contribution to CSAC, as I can see here over the last 4 years. But again, some of these organizations are double dipping. They're going to us, they're coming to us, and then they're going to them. And then you wonder, are they going to the county commissioners as well? Again, when it comes to young people, children, kids, there isn't anything I would rather do than to help them. You know, growing up, we had the old timers program here in Pueblo. We don't have that anymore. So we have kids that are, that can't afford to go to Runyon because it's $1,000 or $1,500, whatever it was. And I was the general manager there when it was $1,000 to participate, et cetera, $100, whatever it was back in the day. This has been 15 years ago. But again, I don't mean to be mumbling, but I have concerns when people are trying to double dip. I really do. Thank you.
Counselor Gomez.
Yeah, boy, what you inherited. Sorry. What a mess. What are your sales outlooks for coming year? What do you think we're at?
For our sales tax
Yes,
base, well,
we're pretty
it's-
flat right now, right?
yeah, we're in the negative right now.
Any predictions coming down the road?
I think that we're gonna remain flat or negative. With Christmas and holiday season, we'll see the numbers go up a little bit. But like I said before, Counselor Gomez, this year's budget was built on a 4.2% increase. Clearly, we're not gonna have a 4.2% increase. That's multi-millions of dollars. And so next year we wanted to be more prepared and really give a better outlook on what we think sales tax is going to be. You have other things that have happened in the last 4 or 5 years that have really made the sales tax grow. And so we were able to pave the substantial amount of roads Counselor Maestri spoke about. We were able to fund a lot of these nonprofits more money. Our reserves grew tremendously. In 2021, their adopted budget fund balance, we only had $5 million in it. So we've got all the way up to $42 million in the last few years, but that's because we debruced and we were able to take in a lot more money. We went online and the city did a portal. So we had one-time sales tax collections on businesses that we normally wouldn't have, like Amazon and Temu and all of these online stores, Etsy stores that sell and were really, people were shopping a lot during COVID and after, and that's not the case anymore. There's not federal stimulus money like there was, and if we don't buckle down this year, the times will get hard over the next few years.
Can I just I just want to bring a couple more points. In reference to Ms. News, I don't know, you're not a Pueblo resident. Oh, you are a Pueblo resident. And all I can tell you is when I read this and I looked at the reductions and stuff and the recommendations, it's pretty refreshing for me. I mean, when I looked at this, I looked at CSEC and playing off of what Mark said. If the board's going to be intact, you get 16 members, correct? And they don't show up at one time. They have different, people there, different quotients and stuff. And I'm worried about the number of that board, how many there are. If you do have a vote and you get it pretty much diluted by that number. And I'm wondering, do we lower the number or do we get rid of CSAC altogether? I'm just curious, and I said, I think the recommendation for me would be to take a look at Ms. Newsom doing something like this and taking this on. Because from what I can tell, this is like an honest attempt to try to straighten this out with the mess you inherited. So for what it's worth, that's all I want to add.
So we go down the line. I've got a couple more questions. When you did the financial analysis or audit, basically, was everybody current on their filed? Okay. And did you ask for, if they weren't current, did you ask for financials certified by their CPA?
Yeah, so it gets a little bit tricky with audit years and the fiscal year ending, depending on when that nonprofit's fiscal year end date is. So right now, it was just today that the audit was being presented for the city of Pueblo to you all. And for some of our nonprofits who have a fiscal year ending 12/31, some of them are a little bit late and in that same situation where we don't have 2023's audited financials. So what we've done is we've asked for their unaudited financials in that situation, knowing that they may change, but it still gives us a good glimpse into their financial health, because going off of 2022 audited financials, that's obviously some stale information. And so, yeah, we tried to, again, paint the holistic picture based on what we had. But there are situations where we had 2022 audited financials and then 2023 unaudited financials.
But do you ask that they be certified by their accountant as to be the correct financials that they're giving you at the time?
So the certification by their accountant would be that audit process that they would still be in the process of. So we will follow up. And that's where during my presentation, I talked about the second prong of this, which is the review, the subrecipient monitoring. That's where that would come into play. But do you mean their CPA firm or their like in-house financial person?
Well, when they give you the financial documents, whether they can be signed by their accountant saying that they are true and correct, validating that maybe the audit hasn't been completed, but that they are true and correct.
Yeah, we don't have any sort of documentation such as that. We just have their unaudited financials that they provided to us that have not yet been signed off by their CPA or accountant.
And I think we're just waiting on one right now, correct?
There were a few of the smaller ones that didn't yet have their audits back, and one larger one.
And so if we don't have the contracts in place and the contracts aren't correct, what are we considering doing to make sure we have a contract in place before you release funds?
So all of the contractual agreements have a contract of some sort. Some of them just don't have dollar amounts attached to them. So in 2026, next year, through the budget season, I think that we need to work with these non-departmentals who have contractual agreements. Some of them are coming due next year, so we'll have to have these conversations anyway to make sure we get a more adequate number like HSPPR does.
Mhm.
And for the others that do not have an actual contractual agreement, if we were to award funding, we would give them a subrecipient agreement or something similar to that, that very clearly delineates what they're able to spend those dollars on. And that is what we would in the future go back and monitor and ensure that they were spent appropriately.
Okay. Yeah, because I was also looking at, some of the recommendations and so forth. And, it's just like, for example, the United Way. I mean, we bought them a building. That takes away their expense, a huge expense for them. I'm just wondering why we're even considering giving them any more money at this point.
Yeah, the United Way is one that is very unusual in this. And that is because the United Way has an active seat on CSAC as a United Way appointee, and therefore they are ineligible. They're the only ones that are in this situation, but they are ineligible to actually apply for CSAC because it's a conflict of interest. And so that one would probably continue to come to the city just because of that strange situation. There's nobody else that's like that.
Well, why would we put them on there if that was conflicting with their ability to apply for funding if they needed it? I mean, they're appointed by the mayor's office in council? Like, why is she on the board if it's creating a conflict of interest on the CSAC board?
Oh, she applied for the board and was approved. I mean,
It's actually in statute that there's a member of United Way. So that was an agreement in the MOU between the city and the county.
Well, then we would be, if we tried to put it completely towards CSAC funding, I guess that would be something that we would have to look at changing, because we're trying to either keep it to CSAC funding or keep it here. So, okay, next, Counselor Martinez.
You're good. You can go ahead.
just a quick question. So Melissa, you said it was, so on our paper, it says 7:55, but you said there was a last minute adjustment. What was the last minute adjustment to take it down?
it was the contractual amount for HSPPR
Oh, okay. And remind me when that contract is up?
next year.
Okay. And I've been saying this for years, and I just want to say for the record that I do believe that nonprofits fill a crucial role in this community. I believe that they provide critical services that to keep our community, our young people healthy and safe, that the city cannot necessarily do. So I do believe that the city should continue to support nonprofits. I've been saying that for years. I'll say it till I'm blue in the face, that I think that we do have I'm sorry, Counselor Maestri. You were talking? Did you have anything? That we do have the need to continue to support these nonprofits. Do you have anything to say?
No, we all have our own opinion, right?
Right, and that's my opinion.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
I'm, again, trying to learn all this stuff. When we look at contractual obligations, I don't know if that's more of a benefit to have that relationship and can you possibly, if you're not following the rules, can you be knocked out of that? And I'll give you, for instance, it's no secret that I'm asking for an investigation on the chamber. And I'm just curious, what happens if somebody doesn't provide you with the information you request financially and they don't meet the date? What happens after that?
Yeah, there are, requirements by each party in each contract, as well as termination clauses. And it would be based on that individual contract, whether or not an offense constituted a termination of that clause.
So in other words, I'm just trying to figure out the benefit of having this contractual obligation. So can other organizations get into that same position for a contractual obligation with the city? How does that work?
that is something that I will be assisting with my role and, making sure that the contracts, as the mayor said, some of them are very old, including the chamber's contract. We want to make sure that those are updated, that they are in the best benefit for the city at this point. And they really just need to be updated.
Just in reference to Sarah, Councilor Martinez, I agree that we have some nonprofits that do provide a very important process and probably could be a department unto their own. But I don't think they're all created equal. I think there are some nonprofits that have some situations and some issues that I'm going to take a look at. But it's my hope that people don't get the wrong idea that I'm not against all nonprofits. I just think that some are run better than others. I think some take it real serious. I think they do inside grant work. I think they do bake sales. I do whatever it takes for them to make it, as opposed to relying on this council for every dollar that they get.
President Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to I think there's a misconception that moving everything to CSAC would somehow we're not funding nonprofits. Literally, the whole premise is that we give CSAC more money and that the county gives CSAC more money. And they still get funding, but they don't come through here, they go through CSAC. I think that's the whole argument, is that either they go to CSAC or they come here, right? And either way, it's going to be the same amount of money. Whether we're sending $490 now. How much is left? What did you tell me was how much?
265.
So yeah, $490 plus $265 if you kept it like this plan, right? So that's close to 800,000 from the city alone. Based on the IGA with the county, I think they'd be obligated to about another five or 600,000 from them, which would put 1.3. My math's right? How close am I? 1.3? Close? So 1.3 at CSAC, which right now they're doing about 800,000. So, I mean, my goal isn't to quit funding or being philanthropic as a city. It's just doing it right is how I'm looking at it. So.
Councilor Flores.
You know, I don't know why we talk about nonprofits in a different fashion. It's like they have leprosy or something. Nonprofits, they provide and solve a lot of social problems in this community. They also pay taxes. When a nonprofit gets a check, Social Security comes off, federal, state taxes come off, the whole 9 yards. And why we treat this segment of the community different, I don't understand. The other thing is that this city, and all you have to do is probably ask your grant writer, where does most of those grants come from? Nonprofit foundations. And as I understand, we had a record year last year of grants, but that money doesn't fall out of the sky. It comes from nonprofit foundations. But anyway, that's for another time. By the way, they employ 6% of all the employment base in Pueblo is nonprofits. And why we would treat them any different than any other constituency, I don't understand. I did want to, you had asked if we wanted to talk about a few of these things because they're really unusual. But the first thing I want to ask is that we need a copy of the intergovernmental agreement on CSAC between the city and the county. Here we are talking about CSAC. And I don't think I've seen any document in the last 4 years, but we need to look at that and ask our deputy city attorney to get us a copy of what that agreement is, where the money comes from, why it was established through a committee, and so that we can answer that, because I don't think there was an answer up here as to, what we can and cannot do, or, it could be in effect for 2 more years, and here we are talking about canceling it. So I think we need to look at the contract. the one thing I wanted to talk about is some of your decisions. And some of these you could probably clear up right away. The YMCA, our contract of giving them 200,000 is over, and that was an obligation of 2 million. So right off the bat, we don't have to pay the 200,000. So that was an easy one.
What I will tell you though, Counselor Flores, is that contract ended several years ago and the city continued to pay the $200,000.
Really,
Yes.
that I didn't know. But I wanted to point out another Pedco on the sheet that you gave me last week. You had I think you were lacking information. What are you recommending now for Pedco?
We're recommending the 350,000.
Okay.
That comes out of Hassett sales tax.
Melissa, did you meet with any of the nonprofits? There's 32, whether they're contractual or they're just separate.
I did not meet with all 32. I met with the ones that I had more in-depth questions, and probably some of the ones that you'll be asking about.
Yeah.
I can tell you too, Counselor Flores, that she watched all the presentations over the last few years on when they came to ask for their asks previously.
Yeah, because one of the things that stands out is that you picked on the arts people. You're recommending 0 go to the Sangre de Cristo Arts and Conference Center. And that's an organization that if you look at their financial statements, they have, on paper, it looks like they have a lot of money. Those are considered endowments or restricted accounts that can only be used for most restricted accounts, and most endowments will not allow you to use any of the money for any operational money. And that one is really, especially when the city of Pueblo and the county got together to create this beautiful museum. And they do bring in revenue as a result of what they use the money for. So they have probably, the last time I looked at it, it's been several years, they bring in about 15,000 visitors a year that really provides income for them.
Yeah.
As an
The
example.
reason for that decision, as you can see, they didn't start to receive any city funding until 2018, where they received $50,000. And it has grown all the way to $300,000 in 5 years. The Art Center is a county-owned building. It's not a building that we take care of. They're not employees that we fund there. And so when we are looking at making budget cuts, we look to give the locations that the city actually owns and that, like you said, could potentially be city employees that are working at these locations. So that was why the Art Center dropped off, and it was only because they started receiving funding in 2018. They had never received funding from the city before that.
There's a couple of museums you guys have cut money from. The Pueblo Symphony, you've cut them almost 200%, from 20 to 7,500. The Wisebrook Museum's the same. The Heritage Museum, you're dropping down from 42 to 15. That's like a 300% reduction. So if you lump the arts community, and I know that they were asking for a crazy amount this year, which I didn't really pay attention to that. But I'm just pointing out these anomalies, and then getting to the greater chamber. I don't know. If you don't meet with people, here's an example, okay, of the city shooting themselves in the foot. If you go to Kevin Ortiz at the convention center, the chamber is really responsible for almost $1 million worth of additional business, banquets, weddings, because they now have a lady that's specifically tied into tourism and marketing of the convention center. So do we want to cut out of their budget $225,000 simply and not understanding that they're bringing in people into Pueblo that are buying stuff, that are spending money at the convention center, And how would you know that? How would you know that that's occurring if you don't meet with them?
So Counselor Flores, I think each one of these nonprofit organizations that you just listed, they all have something similar. And when we did our underwriting, all of them, we treated very similarly. So if you look back at the funding amounts that you can see on the screen or that was in the PowerPoint presentation tonight, we brought each of those back to their 2021 funding amounts. So the 2021 funding amounts were decided in the budget session or in the budget year or in the actual year 2020, I'm sorry, for the fiscal year 2021. Of course, we know that we received a lot of additional funding in 2021. And so these asks have went up exponentially. So while we're cutting them significantly, if you look at the asks over the last 4 years, they have went, from $7,500 to $42,000. And so we are really trying to come back to pre-pandemic norms before we had all the additional ARPA dollars included in this. And that was the methodology behind that. With the Art Center, I will say that I did reach out several times and I did finally get back information last week, but did try to open up those lines of communication. However, with the Art Center, when you look at their audit, just purely based on their financial audit, they are a very healthy nonprofit organization. I understand some of that's endowments, but they also are able to receive the interest off of those endowments, of course, of which they could fill any sort of operational gap that they may have had. So at the same time that we are cutting city department budgets, they are able to, with the income that they have from those endowments, cover any shortfall that they may have. That's, the reasoning behind that zero funding amount.
And by the way, someone had made a comment earlier about the fact that the city departments are all cutting back. But I want to remind you that when it comes to the zoo, the contractual people that we deal with, HSPPR and the zoo, I always forget the list here. The Art Center, HSPPR, the Discovery Center, the Beulah Mountain Park, they didn't give their employees raises the last 2 to 3 years. So all of the departments got hefty raises over COVID over the last 3 years. And we don't give the same consideration to these. We should be negotiating these, but just so you understand that you're cutting the zoo as one example. It's how much are you cutting from the zoo? It's seems like over 300,000. That seemed really off the why can't I find it here? Oh, you're cutting 185,000 out of their budget.
Mm-hmm.
And these are people that are caring for the assets of the city, and they're struggling in my mind. And they continue to struggle with keeping people because they're paying a minimum wage. So what was your rationale on the Pueblo Zoo? And by the way, they just came back from Canada and they got accredited. You know how rare it is for a small city like Pueblo have an accredited zoo. So they're amazing people that are doing that.
Councilor Flores, we don't disagree with any of your statements that you're making about the zoo. But when we're in the financial situation that we're in, we have to think, are we going to be cutting our own city staff? Are we going to have to freeze more positions? Are we going to be freezing police positions? Are we going to be cutting operating budgets? Are we going to be cutting city services to provide additional funding to these non-departmentals, even though they are running a service for the city of Pueblo? If you look at the zoo, particularly in the last 10 years, their operating budget has doubled from what it was in 2015, doubled. So I know specifically that Abby had come in the last year asking for additional funds in order to pay the employees more money so that they could maintain their accreditation. So when you say that we didn't give additional funding in order for the wages to be brought up where they should be so that they can keep the staff that they have in order to get their accreditation, the city council did approve that year after year for the last several years.
But no different than any other department in the city.
Yeah, I can tell you, alone just off the top of my head, the Public Works Department, we cut them over $300,000 just this year. So there are departments that are taking significant cuts, $300,000 or more.
Yeah, all I want to say is this, if you stopped all of the nonprofits that we give money to, which is about 2.1 million right now, it represents 0.016. And that is a very small amount. And I'm glad we're having this conversation, because if we're going to get the structural deficit that we're all talking about under control, this isn't going to do it.
Yeah,
What's going to do it is laying people off.
It's
And
more
s-
than
and-
$2 million, Counselor Flores.
No, you're including, you're
6
including,
million.
no, you're including a contractual
Which are
contracts that.
also nonprofits, as you stated before.
Right, but do you want to take over the zoo? Do you want to take over the animal shelter? You want to take over the art center? You want to take over all of these? Because the city used to do this. So at some point, and you think it's going to be cheaper than they run very tight ships for both those organizations. And I meet with them. I look at their financials continually, but anyway, I won't belabor that. I just have one last thing, and that is, all of this money that was given to these nonprofits, in my mind, were done deliberately, by past city councils. And I don't believe that this is a mess. I believe that the city, whether we're helping kids, which is another thing. It's funny that if you take the 7 organizations that help kids, La Gente, the NAACP, PACO, you guys cut them in half. Why? I don't know, because there's such small amounts. But it seemed like that was a segment, like the arts area, where you guys really dug in and cut these organizations, Boys and Girls Club, La Gente, all organizations that help children, they got the worst. Whereas several of the others, we kept them at the same level. So I don't know, I'm just frustrated, I guess, that the process, I'm not sure I like. And I know that we have to cut our budget. I mean, I'm a realist. And the funny part is that, and Counselor Majesty brought this up, you either have in-house financial statements that are done, done by a bookkeeper. You got to review financial statement, and then you have a full audit. So the organizations that have the best financial information, they got cut the most. You cut the Latino Chamber from 100,000 to 25. You cut the Arts Center from 300,000 to 0. And these are both organizations that I know have full-blown audits with accountants' letter certifying their information. So what good did that do to have a full audit and be treated that way? I don't understand that. That's all I have.
Counselor Gomez.
I think we're just out of money. I mean, I think this doesn't do this mayor any good politically. I mean, people are going to wake up this week and go, oh my God. And it's a tough choices she has to make. And I don't think there's any intent to hit the arts or whatever. I think these are things you have to be done, and they're tough swallows. I got it. But you're not going to be able to keep on doing this. I mean, can somebody answer me a question? How many nonprofits, when I look up different things, I do research, one says 501 nonprofits, not all getting money, but in the city, 501 to 894. I get so many different numbers. So if we're going to be looking at all the nonprofits, which again, I don't have a problem with the ones that are run righteously. I have a problem with the ones that are jumping online. Does anybody know that number right now?
We can get that for you, Counselor.
Yeah, I appreciate it because there's a lot.
Sure.
So for what it's worth, I think what she's trying to do here, I don't see any intent to knock out a particular group. I think it's pretty much throwing a dart on and say, hey, hope this dart lands hopefully in the right place, because you're going to have to make some tough hits, and we're going to have to swallow a lot of stuff and face facts. We're in trouble.
Can I ask one more question? It's really off the topic. Counselor Gomez, you indicated that you are investigating. the
I'm not
great-
investigating.
Oh, well, who is?
I presented it to them to investigate.
So are we, Harley, are we following a full investigation on the Greater Chamber of Commerce?
No, not at this time. I'll be discussing this with council at a later time, but I haven't found the authority for city council to investigate them. But there are some avenues and some approaches we can take that I'll discuss with you at a later time.
Because this is the first I heard of it, and all 7 of us should have knowledge of that.
Anyone else? Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councilor
I want to
Maestri.
say
Just-
thank you.
Just wanted to,
Okay.
you know, so you'll be getting a full budget presentation, the start of it on the 15th. And if there's no changes, this is what will be presented to you. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware.
All right. Well, this is the same conversation for the past 3 years. And what it comes down to, and I see that you realize that it's priority. You're prioritizing how we spend the taxpayers' money. And it looks like everybody's, taking a hit across the board. So we're gonna have to decide as a council what our priorities are. And are we following, the charter when it comes to prioritizing those funds? And because in the past 2 years, we've come with budgets, been presented with budgets that are, I think, 10 million the first year, 13 million the second year, and then all these discussions took place, and then we added on. And we only added on when it came to non-departmentals and nonprofits. So council went and increased the budget even after the recommendations of the mayor. So I'm hoping that we can, and we're in serious trouble if we continue this way. And we're still $8 million over. And that's if we get the sales tax that we're expecting.
Right.
Because there's no guarantees there, not the way the economy is going. So, all right. Yes.
I think it's very important, and I hope everybody understands, but I'm saying this specifically to the new counselors, is that literally this is a mayor's recommendation. The ultimate responsibility lies on city council, whether they're going to accept this or they're not going to accept that. I mean, to Councilor Flores and Councilor Martinez, if you don't like the way that they cut people, I mean, we have the power to do whatever we want to do when it comes to the budget. So this is a recommendation. It's literally one of the only things, and I know I sound like a broken record, one of the only things the city council can actually do and actually has control over. So I just want to throw that out there.
Mhm.
That if there's something that you don't like, you need to speak up and you need to make recommendations to your fellow board members.
And I'm happy to, I know I sent all of you an email, but we're happy to sit down and go line by line. I mean, this was a tremendous amount of information to go through. So if you want to reach out to my office, we can sit down and go over, and not just for the non-departmentals. Now that you've seen first glance of what the budget is going to look like, if any of you would like to meet to discuss where these numbers come from, especially the newer counselors, because I know it is a great
When are we
deal of
getting the actual budget book?
on the 15th,
On the
2
15th?
weeks.
Perfect.
But under the statute or the charter, you as the mayor have full responsibility to put the budget together. But it has to be ratified by the 7 of us. And if we have changes, to be redundant here, I'm well aware that we can recommend the changes that we want to see. And that'll happen. When do we have what's the deadline for the final budget?
We have, Yeah, we have several budget meetings from the 15th on. I think we meet 4 times.
I just have to say that I actually met with Mayor Graham about the budget and about this whole book, and I found it really enlightening. So I want to thank you for that. It was very enlightening. My final question is, with this whole new process that's getting rolled out, I'm curious how, with your meetings with the various nonprofit directors, have they given any feedback about, like just this new process?
Yeah, there's been some education that's had to happen, and I think that they are expecting that there may be some cuts this upcoming fiscal year. So I don't think that I think that they're expecting this. I think that they've been tracking city council very closely, as well as, the mayor's office.
Have they suggested any process improvements?
Not yet, but we would be open to that. Absolutely.
I'm just curious, as this is going to continue year to year, if there are any like quality improvement processes that can be better done as this new system is getting rolled out. I've heard good things, in terms of the application and the level of information that's now required. So it would be interesting to hear, like, with a satisfaction survey or something like that after.
I think too, like a reason why I wanted to do this and have Melissa join my team is when we do fund the non-departmentals and the nonprofits, my office fields tons of calls of where people can get services, what those services look like, who's going to offer them. And so being able to now have this compiled report on what these nonprofits actually do with these dollars that are provided with taxpayer monies, I think that we'll be able to direct people who are calling looking for certain services to where we can say, yeah, Boys and Girls Club, with the money that we give them, provide lunches for X amount of kids. And so I think that this has been a knowledgeable experience to see what the nonprofits and the non-departmentals are going to be spending the funds that the city allocates to them.
One last question. So when we allocate funds to them, we don't have any restrictions when it comes to salaries, because some of the other grant monies that they receive, that they apply for and receive, there's salary restrictions, correct?
I think so. From other, when you get grants from DOLA, they can't be paid on employees. And
Yeah, at a federal level, there are some requirements. I'm not sure if it's blanket at a federal level or if it's just some of the housing dollars. I know that there are. I can tell you that CSAC, that is something that during their report, they do look at the executive director's salary should be listed on the 990. It isn't always, but it should be. And that's something that you can look at to see if the salary meets the expectations.
All right. All right. Well, good evening. Have a good evening, rest of the evening. Oh,
I have one.
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
I'm sorry. I
Councilman
apologize. I came on late there. I think we need to understand in terms of, as an example, La Gente. We have El Centro de Quinta Sol Recreation Center on the Lower East Side. And there's all kinds of things going on there. And there's things going on at La Gente. But we have to remember that the city just bought the park out in Dog Patch for football, softball, and baseball that was being played out there. The St. Anne sold to the city because they couldn't handle it anymore. So we're helping these organizations. And again, I have a compassionate side when it comes to young people. They play a very important part of my heart. And I think you know what my background is. Anyway, long and short, we need to be fortuitous and we need to be transparent when we're giving money out to organizations. And I think that we did some of that this evening because we've got CSAC. That's one organization we're giving money to. The county's giving money to them. And some of these organizations are going, not only coming to us, but they're going to them as well. To the county and then to the city and then to CSAC on an individual basis. I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, are we done then for the evening. Thank you, Mayor and Melissa. Appreciate it. It is, the time is 7:54 on September 30th, and we are adjourned.